So welcome back, everybody, and thank you again for your flexibility last week. Myself and my family appreciate that. So a couple of things real quick. This module that I'm going to go through today, I've toyed with whether or not to take it out. This section is really on the whole project management piece that comes along with implementing One Shopping Cart as a service. And what I mean by that is implementing One Shopping Cart from kind of the ground up. So what I'd love to hear from you is after we've gone through today's session, whether you find this of value or not, because like I said, I've been kind of on the fence on whether I want to continue to teach this section because I'm not sure how relevant it is to what people need. So what I'm asking is any feedback that you would have, you can certainly reach out to me directly, or you can post in the Facebook group, whatever works best for you. Cindy, that's okay. Today's class, we're actually just going to be talking about project management. So if you want to start typing your questions, I can answer them as we go. Oops, darn mouse. Sorry. There we go. Okay, so with that said, again, just asking for feedback on whether you think this session that we're going to go through today is valuable to you or not. Because that's going to help me kind of going forward. So let's just talk the agenda today. Today, we're going to do just the usual housekeeping, and thank you for your flexibility again last week. So this class is actually extended a week because we skipped last week. But we'll review Module 1. We're going to look at Project Management 101. So how does project management play into actually implementing One Shopping Cart? So this is different than just doing day-to-day stuff in One Shopping Cart for clients. This is actually implementing it from the ground up, which means maybe you're implementing the affiliate piece, or maybe you're implementing just a shopping cart, or maybe you're implementing just the email marketing piece. So we're going to talk about that, and then have an action plan around that, and then homework, and then our Q&A. So as I mentioned, this class has just been extended a week because of last week. So we have updated GoToWebinar, and you probably got an email from GoToWebinar if you were registered that says that the class has been extended a week, and that's what that's about. For those of you who are just listening to recordings, don't worry about that. We will also make sure that the schedule is updated to reflect the new timeline. All recordings and resources will be in the library, as well as the homework. I am updating some of the documents, so keep your eyes open for that information to come out as well. We do have the private Facebook group, so make sure that if you have questions or comments, feedback, any kind of information, you're welcome to share that in the private Facebook group. That group's only for students, so the world doesn't see it. It's just for people within. You will have access to the practice sandbox. I believe that the logins are already in the library. I do change those passwords quite often, so keep your eyes open. We'll let you know when I change them. They're due to be changed here in the next week or so. We will send you an email to let you know. And then any issues or questions you have, reach out to me at help@techiementor.com. So module 1 was all about packaging. Okay, how to take what we're offering here in One Shopping Cart and not only, have it as a service, but also how to structure it as a package to really get you away from trading dollars for hours. Defining your processes, so the processes that actually go into actually offering this as a service along with packages, and then the templates and tools that you have. And we'll come back and revisit this same module at the end of the course, because that way you've had a chance to actually go through One Shopping Cart and kind of get a better understanding of it, and maybe get a feel for what portions you want to work on. Maybe you decide you don't want to do the implementation. Maybe you only want to do the monthly management. Perfectly fine, your business, your choice. Okay. So Cindy, did you want to type in your questions now, or do you want me to just go ahead and go ahead? Go ahead and move forward, and you can type them in as you go, or did you want to wait to the end? Remember, this is your time, so you let me know. I'm going to go ahead and push forward until I see you pop up in there. Okay, so this is Project Management 101. So what you need to realize is when you're going to implement One Shopping Cart from the ground up, this means a client comes to Cindy and says, you know what, Cindy, I just bought One Shopping Cart. Can you implement it for me? I signed up for it. I bought the subscription package. I don't know anything else I need to do. Can you take it from here? That is an actual project. And the definition of a project is something that's unique and has a definite timeline, has a beginning and end, right? It's not something that's ongoing. Anything that's considered ongoing would be support type or operational work. So if you do specific things, like you send an e-zine out every month for your client, okay, that's really an operation. That's the same task each month. If you do something that has a beginning and end, like creating a template for an e-zine, that would have an actual beginning and end. That would be considered a project. So just so everybody understands my definition of a project. And remember, I'm a project manager by trade. And so that's where my definition comes from is PMI, which is where my certification is from. Okay, so enough about that. Each project has its own contract. So you may do 5 or 6 implementations of one shopping cart a year, but they're not all the same. They're different clients and they need different things and they have different types of businesses. So each one is its own project and has its own contract. It also has its own set of deliverables. So even though you're implementing one shopping cart for 5 different businesses, they're all different. They all need different things. They have different numbers of products, different numbers of autoresponders, different numbers of affiliates, different things that they need. So keep that in your mind when you're working in implementation of whether it's one shopping cart, Infusionsoft, Ontraport, WordPress, it's all the same things, kind of rinse and repeat. Each one has its own deadline. Right? They're all due at a different time. And then you should have a project for each and every one of them within your task management system. So I use Teamwork. And within Teamwork, I would have the individual projects that were needed for each of the individual clients that I was actually working with. Okay. So when you set up projects, and remember, I'm really talking here about implementing one shopping cart from the ground up. I'm not talking about just doing a monthly e-zines or adding, monthly projects or products, excuse me. I'm talking about implementing it from soup to nuts, ground up. It's never been used before. It's brand new. That's what this whole focus is about. Because one of the beauties of this class and the knowledge that you're going to gain is that you'll be able to do just that. You'll be able to implement, one shopping cart from the ground up. Okay. So when you're working on these projects, you need to make sure it's very clear what's included. And we talked about this in packaging, but it's very important that there's no gray area here. You want clients to understand what it is that you're providing, okay? Any a la carte items, which would be your one-off. So if you have a package around setup, right, and you have like 3 different packages, you have like maybe a beginning, intermediate, and advanced, for lack of a better term. And the client picture advanced, or excuse me, your intermediate package, and they need what's in the package, but they need some additional items. Maybe your package sells with 10 products and they need 12. So your a la carte items would allow you to price the 2 additional items because it's going to be more money and maybe more time. So that's what a la carte's about. You define what's called the deliverables. In other words, what are you delivering? It's like a package, right? These are the things that you're going to get the following things in this project, okay? And one of the beautiful things you can do is the more you do this, you can create an FAQ page or a list, if you will, for clients or prospects. So if you get asked the same questions, over and over again by clients wanting to know, okay, what do I do with this or what do I do with that? You can actually create an FAQ page and put that on your website, or you could just create a document that you send to clients along with maybe their contract or any other questionnaires that you have. So it will answer those questions for you. So let's talk terminology, and this is project management terminology, okay? And you may hear me say some of these things. Scope is what you're delivering, okay? It's your focus of what you're delivering, okay? And the reason scope is important is to help you alleviate something called scope creep. Excuse me, if you've ever heard of scope creep, it's basically where you have a specific set of things that you're going to deliver, and then the client comes back and goes, well, I want more, right? Well, anytime you add to the scope of a project, that means you're increasing the cost and also increasing the timeline. So scope creep, that's what it's called, happens all the time in projects. By having a very specific defined scope, it will help you determine when somebody's trying to add, and then also go back to the client and say, well, here's what we agreed on, here's what you want to add, here's the additional cost, here's what it's going to do to the timeline. Resources can be human resources, they can be material resources like a piece of paper, a computer. Constraints, a constraint is something that constrains your timeline. Constraints usually have to happen on a specific day, and so it can really delay, if you will. If the constraint is missed, it can really delay your overall timeline of your project. So an example of a constraint is if somebody has to approve something on a specific day and it's not done, then that really constrains your project. A milestone is just simply a line in the sand. It's an event that happens within the project. It doesn't really have any time. It doesn't really have anybody doing the work. It's just an event that happens, like client signs the invoice, I can't talk. Clients sign the contract and pays the invoice. Well, you can't start work until those two events happen, so milestones are important. Dependencies would be when you have a project that relies maybe on another project or actually relies on another task. Example would be if you're building a house, right? You will put the foundation down, and then before you can actually build on the house, you have to pour the concrete, right? So the actual framing of the house would come after the concrete pouring. So the foundation would be dependent upon when the concrete was poured. So that's a relationship or dependency. A deliverable is something that you deliver as part of a project. For instance, I'll deliver a one shopping cart implementation that has, the email marketing piece is set up, the affiliate piece is set up, so that would be a deliverable, and you can break those down into pieces. Your project schedule is the timeline, and then project plan is the plan on how do you plan to manage a project. And then I see a couple of questions here. So Cindy, I'm just going to grab these right now. So Cindy, for Q&A, this is an implementation. Number one, does one shopping cart have an if and then? So my client has one opt-in for a freebie and has an AR that goes with that. She would like them to be automatically added to ezine AR. Is that possible? It doesn't have an if-then, but there is a way to automatically add them if they opt in for a freebie that will automatically add them to a second AR. So that is, when we get into the ARs, Cindy, what you basically have to do is you have to add a second piece of form to the form code that goes on the client's website when they opt in. So for instance, if they have an opt-in form, you would have an additional piece of code that would go in the opt-in form that tells them that they go in 2 different ARs. Does that make sense? And so that's not uncommon. That's something you have to do in the form, the HTML though. Another question is there a way when managing customers for an admin to change the email address on an account? Yes, you would just go under the contact record and you would update the email address. Now, if the email address is already in use for, maybe they're signed up twice with 2 different email addresses, it won't allow you to add an existing email address because that's the unique identifier. That's how it manages it in the database. So what you'd have to do is either you would have to block the existing email address in order to update it, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's that one. Or a way to merge contacts if a person has started with 2. You would block the email address that you don't want to use and then make sure that you leave the other one open. So there's not a merge like there is in Infusionsoft that allows you to merge contact records. There's not one in Infusionsoft, or excuse me, one shopping cart yet. Does that make sense? Does that answer those questions for you? Good questions. Because I know you're taking Infusionsoft as well. So just wanted to kind of point that out to you. Mary, can these specific questions be left until the agenda is covered? Mary, I was just going to, like I said, I'd like these to be interactive, so I'm just answering those for her now, but we're going to get back on the agenda here in just a moment. It doesn't block products. It'll just funnel everything through that one email address. And what you might want to do, Cindy, when we actually get to working in contacts, I'll show you how you can merge the 2 together, but you have to do it manually. Okay? Okay. Back to projects. As I mentioned, a project is temporary, has a defined beginning and end. So it has a beginning and it has an end. Now, that doesn't mean those dates don't shift, but there are a set of dates that go with a project. Remember, operations and support work doesn't really have an end date. It just continues each and every month. A project is unique. So even if you do the same thing over and over again, it's still unique because it's a different client with a different set of requirements, not a routine operation, and needs to be managed to deliver on time, on budget results. So really, a project manager, their job is to deliver a project on time and on budget, regardless of anything else. Okay, that's kind of, if you will, that's their modus operandi. Okay, so let's talk about the phases. So every project goes through a set of phases. So still we're talking about the one shopping cart implementation, right? And each one goes through each one of these phases. So it's basically, like phases in life. You go through phases in life, projects go through phases as well. PMI, oops, and I forgot to spell that out. Let me make myself a note here. PMI stands for Project Management Institute, just so you know. That is the governing body, especially here in the United States, for project managers. That's also where you would take any kind of that's where my certification came from, or comes from. I still have it. It's just something I took when I was in corporate. So this is where these phases, and you can change the names of these, but they still do the same thing. So basically, there's always an initiation phase. So this would be when a client reaches out to you, or I should say a prospective client reaches out to you and says, I'm interested in working with you to implement One Shopping Cart. So that would be an initiation. A plan would be, okay, the client has paid, you've decided on a package, right? If you have packages, or if you're doing, a specific implementation, they have decided on what they want to implement and they've paid the invoice. And basically now you're actually going to plan out what it is that you're going to implement for them. Okay, so this is when you would sit down with them and do what I would call a planning session, and go through a questionnaire that's specific to what they need. Execute is also known as build. This is when you're actually doing the work. Now remember, a lot of people subcontract things as well. So you may have a VA team, right? And part of your VA team would be to just outsource the work that needs to be done. So during the build phase or the execute phase, you would actually have other people doing the work, or you could be doing the work. It can go either way. Monitor and control happens during the execution phase, the building phase. You're constantly watching to make sure people are doing the work, getting stuff done on time, making any course corrections, and you're basically, wearing your fire hat at this point. You're basically making sure things are moving along smoothly. Easier to do if it's just you doing all the work, harder to do if you have to manage other people to do the work. Okay, and then once you actually have implemented and turned the keys over, so to speak, to the client, it would be closed. So we're going to kind of walk through these. And again, remember, we're coming at it from the One Shopping Cart implementation side. So initiation is when they reach out to you. So this is the prospect reaching out to you. Is this something that they reach out to you on a web form? Like, I'm really big on web forms. I'm really big on questionnaires, because what this allows people to do is answer the questions, and instead of waiting to hear from you or waiting to reach out to you because it's in the middle of the night, right? They have the option to fill everything out that they need now while they have the information in front of them. Okay, go ahead and get strike while the iron's hot, as they say. So I'm really big about having a web form, and a web form can simply be a Gravity form, a Woo form. It can be a Contact 7 plugin if you have WordPress. It's very simple to go through and create. Once they have contacted you, what I would suggest is have a discovery meeting. And this basically allows you to talk to them. You can record this if you like, and you can come back to it, listen to it at a later time. But this will allow you to understand what they're looking for, right? What is it that they want to do? And you may be talking to them and realize, well, you don't even need One Shopping Cart. You're okay to stick with MailChimp, for instance, right? Discuss the setup details. So get a sense of what they are looking for. Maybe they've bought One Shopping Cart, but they have no idea what to do with it at this point. So this is where you can step in. Remember, whatever you offer as a service in your business, you are known as an expert, right? You are the expert. So clients are going to come to you and ask you questions. Well, do I really need to do this? Do I need to do that? So they really are looking for a sense of direction from you as well. Obviously, answer any questions that they have, and then follow up. So whenever you do a discovery meeting, I always recommend that you end the call with some kind of a next step, right? A follow-up. Cindy, do I record all discovery meetings? What to use? I do, because it really helps me, especially when we move on. If they decide to go with me, it really helps me kind of go back and listen to it if we kind of get off track. I just use a free conference bridge, right? I use free conference call HD standing for high def. It's free, and it's just a conference bridge that they call in, and you can just record it. And I let them know I'm recording it, and I tell them why, and I send them a copy of it if they want it. So I do, and I do that again. For my project management years, I record everything. There's always a paper trail for everything that I do. Okay. So here's an example, and these are my samples, right? This is what I did in my business. You can take this and tweak it and make it your own, or you can just basically do what I did. It works. So a discovery meeting, your choice, can be 15 to 30 minutes. Mine were 15, because I had them fill out the form ahead of time. That way I had the information that I could review before I got on the phone, versus taking 10 minutes of the time for them to explain what they needed. I already had that information up front. It's efficient and it respects people's time because everybody's time is valuable. So for me, I would have them fill out the web form, I would take the web form, review it, and then I would come to the discovery meeting already having an idea of what they want to do. Okay, so I would view that questionnaire that was on my website with them, say, here's what I see that you need, Cindy, right? And then find out what are the goals, what are the scope, what do they see that they need? Because remember, there's a lot of, or you may not know this, but there's tons of moving pieces to one shopping cart. It is a monster. So knowing everything that has to do with one shopping cart is great because then you can simply say, okay, when they go, well, I really just need to be able to send out my e-zine. I need to use it for people who want to opt into my website, and I need to sell my one online product, right? So that gives you an idea of how big their business is. And so that will really help you with the scope, as well as the goals and the timeline. The timeline is really important because they may come back and say, okay, Mary, I need this done next week. You're like, you want me to implement a full version of one shopping cart in a week? Can you do it? Possibly, but do you want to? Or what is your current project load today? Right? You may already be so busy that you can't take somebody on for another 2 weeks, right? So you need to understand what their deadline date is. What I've seen a lot of people do is they wait to the last minute and then they try to find somebody to implement the pieces that they need because they're going to an event and they want to sell their online product. Right? Well, they need a way to do it. They need a shopping cart in this instance to do that. And they need to put, they need to have their opt-in page up and they need to make sure that they put the buttons on there. They need to attach them to the product and the AR, all of those things. So you need to understand what their deadline is because that may give you an idea of whether or not you want to take on the project. And another thing to remember is since this is your business, you get to choose who you work with. So this discovery meeting can also kind of give you an idea if this is an ideal person for you to work with or not, right? You still have the option to say no and refer them elsewhere if you like, right? And the beauty of having the private Facebook group that we have here is that you could always refer them to another student that went through the class. So you know that this person does know one shopping cart, right? Okay. So after every meeting, I have what's called a deliverable. So something comes out of that meeting, okay? An estimate or a proposal document. Now I actually have a proposal document because remember, not all projects are going to be the same time, need the same things, and it's going to, so in other words, your costs may be different. So you can create an estimate or a proposal document. I have a very simple one that I've given you a sample of, but basically based on what I hear from my prospective client in this discovery meeting, I hear the following things. So in this proposal document, I include the scope. So this is what I will be doing for you when I implement one shopping cart. Maybe you include something that's out. And the reason I put out there is a lot of times clients may want more than what you've agreed upon, and this helps with scope creep. So for instance, let's say that I sell Cindy a specific package and it doesn't include the affiliate piece, right? But she keeps asking for the affiliate piece. So I would be very clear in my scope that it says it includes all this, but it does not include affiliates. So that way it's very clear to her. If she wants affiliates, that's fine, but that's going to add to the cost and the timeline because that's going to take me more time and effort, right? And you should be paid for that, okay? You can include high-low. When it comes to project management, you always want to put in some wiggle room. Okay, this isn't the same as packages. Packages have a specific set of deliverables. A project is based on the project, so everyone is different. That's why they're unique. So you'd have to look at what they wanted based on the information that they give you, and you could give them a high-low estimate, not only with pricing, but with deadlines too. You always want a little wiggle room there. Okay, and then whatever task, if you have additional tasks, maybe the client needs to provide you with some specific information. You might want to list that out as well. And then I would give them a deadline for the response. So if you send them a proposal or an estimate document, I'd say, okay, I'm going to follow up with you in a week to see if you have any questions, and then follow up. I got more clients because I was the only person that followed up. So follow up with people. And a lot of people think, oh, they just don't want to work with me. And that's not true. People get busy and forget. I know I get busy all the time and forget things. So, sometimes I need reminders. My team reminds me, and then sometimes my clients remind me. So it's a good thing to follow up with people. So, put it on your calendar for a specific date and time, and then follow up with them, okay? So after you follow up, let's say the client says yes. So now they're not a prospect, now they're a true client. They actually want to do business with you. So you send them your contract, right? Now, so you sent them the proposal, they reviewed it, they said, yes, that's good to go. You send them the contract. You can either invoice for the whole project or 50% upfront. Your choice. Your business, your choice. I usually did 100% for things like Infusionsoft or One Shopping Cart. I usually do 50% for websites, but that's just me. You choose what you want, okay? And you don't actually start the next phase, the planning phase, until you have the signed contract and you have the invoice paid. Now, some people push back, I've found in the past, when it comes to signing a contract for certain things. And you know, the contract is to protect both parties. So it might be a red flag, at least it was for me. If clients weren't willing to sign a contract, I wasn't willing to do business with them because it protects both parties, especially when it comes to projects, because you don't want that gray area, because then you can get into that he said, she said stuff, and nobody wins those. Okay. So initiation phase, you want to create a contact form. Okay. And it could be, and I call it a contact form, but it could be just a questionnaire, right? And I say contact form because I use contact form 7 for mine. Put it on your website. And that's going to make it so much more efficient. 24/7, people can stop in at any time and enter their information, and then you can set up that follow-up call, that discovery call with them, and find out, you know, a little bit more about them, find out what type of, you know, if they're an ideal client for you, and whether or not you can meet their needs and their timeline. So listen to them, ask questions, and you know, you're the expert, right? And you're going to be perceived as the expert. So don't begin until your contract is signed and your invoice is paid. Then you can start your work. Okay, so that's the initiation phase. Any questions on that before we go to the next step? So obviously planning means the clients have said, you know, I am a client, I have paid, I signed my contract, I'm ready to move. I should say move forward. All right, we're good? Okay, so let's talk planning. Okay, I always do what's called a kickoff call. This is a project management thing. Okay, you basically schedule a kickoff call to kick off the project specifically, right? This is makes it official. So this is an additional call. You can call it a kickoff call, you can call it a planning call, whatever terminology you want to use. And I actually send them what I would call a checklist or questionnaire. Now I have a questionnaire that is in the library, and it is a monster. And it's basically everything that you can do within One Shopping Cart. And I'll probably be making some tweaks to it because One Shopping Cart has added some new features since the last time I taught this class. So I'll be adding to that. But basically, this questionnaire is not a one size fits all. I put it all in one document so you can pull out the pieces that are relevant for this client. So you may not want to send them this 8-page document asking them questions on things that you're not going to be implementing for them. Not a good idea. So you'll want to pull it out and make it your own. Okay. Every project that you do should have a questionnaire, because this is what you use to implement what you are doing, right? This is the implementation piece, if you will, of the project. And a questionnaire or checklist, if you will, saves time. So instead of going back and forth on everything that you need to know in order to implement something, you know, maybe you're sending email or talking on the phone, you can get it done in one shot. Now, that doesn't mean you won't have additional questions, but you want to get as much of this done up front. You also look organized and you also look professional, right? And you're also much more efficient by having these questionnaires. So I've provided them for you, and then you can tweak them as needed. So basically what you do is you schedule the call, you send them the questionnaire, and I would always say, you know, don't worry about filling out the questionnaire, fill out what you can, because some people get a little overwhelmed when they look at the questionnaire because they have no idea what the questions are or what they're for. Your job, because you're the expert, is on the calls to go over the checklist or questionnaire with them and explain what they don't understand, okay? This document is what helps you implement the project. I can't stress that enough. This is probably the most important document there is, because this is what's going to help you. Again, you can't have every possible answer to every scenario, but you can get the basics of what you need to know. As you'll go through One Shopping Cart, you'll see what I mean. The setup alone is a ton of information. And instead of going back and forth on each question, the questionnaire allows you to get all this information up front. And if you have action items that come out of this planning meeting, right, the client needs to provide you with answers to, you know, questions 8 through 10. Make sure that you have those action items and make sure that you get that information, and let the client know that I can't set this up until you've given me this information, right? So make sure you get all the details that you can. I record these calls just like I record the discovery call. So I would use the same rule. And I basically go through the questionnaire, but I also go through, the deadline dates. Are there any team members? And I put team members here because when it comes to team members, Do you have somebody who's going to be doing some work? Are you going to outsource the work, right? Or does the client have team members that you're going to be working with? Important to understand that whole dynamic, right? Responsibilities. If there are team members on both sides, what are their responsibilities? Right? Who's responsible for what? Very clear. And then what's the best way to communicate, right? I prefer communicating through my task management system, so I would make that known. Excuse me, be clear on what is delivered, by whom and when. So who is doing what and when is it due? Okay, very, very important to set that up in the beginning. So once the call is complete, right, you're going to want to make sure that you've got everything you need for the questionnaire. And then you may be some follow-up behind that because they don't have everything that you need, and that's fine. Just make sure they understand that they have to follow up with you. The second option here is just something that is a project management fundamental, not something you have to do here, but it's called a project plan. And basically a project plan is how you manage the project. So in other words, how do you communicate, what tools do you use, how often do you have meetings, all of those types of things. A lot of times, unless you have a lot of players in your project, you don't need a project plan document. If you have a lot of team members, it's something that you might consider. And I've actually have one in the library that you can look at. Not required, but something you could do if you felt the need to do so. And then make sure that you understand the task and they understand the task and the schedule, so the timeline. Make sure that everything, and have them understand that in order for you to meet the timeline, they have to get you the goodies you need in order to do the work. So they're on the hook as well. Okay, so make sure that you take the time to do, like I said, this is the most important phase in my opinion. You know, failure to plan is planning to fail. And I will make sure that I go back and add the piece about making sure it's recorded. Same thing, you want to make sure that you record this. It's just as important, even actually it's more important than the discovery call. Use a questionnaire, and I said I've had that template. Send it to the client prior to the kickoff call or the planning call, whatever you want to call it. And then, you know, take your time and be thorough. I usually do an hour for these calls, just because. If you need more than that, so be it. If you need less than that, so be it as well. But you really want to be thorough, and it really depends on what they're doing. So every project is different. Keep that in mind. Also, set up the project in your task management system. So once you figure out what you're doing, right, you have the task, you understand what you're implementing, you can actually create a project in your task management system and have a project for that specific client. So each project would be per client. Invite the client to it. You know, tell the client, this is what I'm using to manage this entire process. And you can log in at any time with your specific login and you can see what I'm doing. So they're not relying on you to send status reports. You're putting the onus back on them to saying, you can log in anytime, 24/7. Don't wait for me. Take a look. Here's what I'm doing. So I have all the tasks in there. I also add the documents, right? The questionnaires, the contract. I also add things like the recordings, right, from the calls that we've had, so they can access those if they have questions. And I make sure the task assignments and timelines are all in there. So if the client owes me something, I put a task in there, I put an assignment on it, and I email it to him and says, you owe me these things by this date. This is your action plan. This is how you're going to actually implement whatever it is you just sold. Okay? And the nice thing about this is that you can be really specific, because clients don't really know how long it takes to get stuff done. And they don't understand all the things that are involved in it either. It's not their job. That's why they hired you. So your task can be very detailed so they can understand why it takes so long to get something done because of all the things that you have to do. Kind of gives them a sense of all the moving parts. Okay, so any questions on the planning session before I move on to the next one? Like I said, to me, planning is the most important piece. I know when I was a full-time project manager, you know, planning sessions were one of the almost as long sometimes as the building sections, or the building phase, because of all the intricacies that went into it. Now, I used to develop software, so obviously different than this. But if you don't plan correctly, then you're not going to deliver correctly, and then no one's going to be happy. So make sure you take the time when it comes to planning. Okay. All right. Execution. This is also known as build. This is when you're actually doing the work, right? You want to make sure that you have all your information in your task management system, because that's really going to help you stay on top of things, especially guys, if you have a team that's doing some of the work. If you're outsourcing work to others because it's out of your expertise, then make sure that those are accounted for in your task management system, because you have to track that as the project manager. You have to make sure people are doing their work, right? And the only way to do that is for a location where everybody can get to, right? Not sticky notes, not an Excel spreadsheet, something cloud-based where everybody has their own login and can look at just their information, right? So that's what a task management system can do for you. Make sure it's clear who's responsible for what and when, okay? Who's responsible for, providing the content? Who's responsible for giving me the logos I need to brand the shopping cart? Who's responsible for writing the autoresponder series that I'm going to send out? And when am I going to get to it? And make sure that they're held to the deadline, because if the deadline slips, then the schedule slips. Very important. And like I said, the execution or building phase is usually the longest phase. This is when you're doing all the building. Now, you obviously will have questions as you go through and do things. So, I'm not saying that after you've done extensive planning that you're still not going to have questions. No, you will, but you'll have the majority of what you need to get started and get the project built. So examples of some deliverables. If I'm doing the one shopping cart setup, and this is all based on the task that you're doing, I branded the shopping cart, which means put your logo and your colors in there. I added 5 products, 5 autoresponders, and I'm going to send out 5. I scheduled 5 different broadcasts. So it's just the details of what you're delivering. Okay. This is what you're doing during the execution of the building phase. You're actually setting up the products and the autoresponders and the broadcast and the branding and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So using a task management system, and for those of you who know me, I'm huge on task management. Make sure that your clients have access and they understand which one that you're using and that you use it as well. It's wonderful to have it, but you have to actually commit to using it. And it's a habit that you have to form. So use a task management system and give clients access to their project. It's all permission based. You only give them access to what you want them to see. Okay. Make sure that you continually communicate as you go through the process. And, same thing, when you're working in a project, it's still important to quantify things. So if they want for you to set up products, make sure you tell them up to how many that you're going to set up. Cindy, using the title autoresponders has been getting me in trouble. I feel like an autoresponder is setting it up in one email. One client thought it might be all. Okay, so good point here. So for one shopping cart, an autoresponder is a message that goes out in response to a trigger. Somebody buys something, somebody signs up for something, okay? It's not something that you can schedule, right? And an autoresponder can have a series of messages. It can be 1 or it can be 50. It can be 1 and it can be dripped out over 50 days, okay? A broadcast is something that you would send on a schedule, a specific date with a specific time. It's an email. It's not triggered by anything. You control when that goes out and to whom it goes out, right? A autoresponder goes out to a specific list based on that trigger. Does that make sense? Yeah, and you have to be really careful with clients when it comes to terminology. They get stuck on autoresponder and they use that for broadcast. And if you guys are speaking 2 different languages, so I would have a client says, okay, I need you to schedule an autoresponder to go out on, March 4th. I'm like, no, that's not an autoresponder, that's a broadcast. Okay, so terminology can also get you hung up, which is a really great thing. I should write that down. Thank you for that. Cindy, but it is quantifying how many emails are in the autoresponder. She had 17 emails dripped out in one autoresponder. Exactly. So you can say, you can have 5 autoresponders and you can quantify it even further, saying, okay, you can have up to 5 autoresponders with a total of 5 emails apiece. Okay, and I just didn't do that quantification here, but that's what you can do. So that's a good point as well. Make sure that if you do that, you are clear. And I will add that as well. Sorry, I misunderstood your note there. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. So yeah, you would want to quantify autoresponder, because in one shopping cart, autoresponders are 2 things. They actually create the segment of the list, but they also act as a true autoresponder. As where in Infusionsoft, it's different, right? Infusionsoft's they're called tags, right? And so an autoresponder is actually called a follow-up sequence. Not to confuse the issue, but thank you for bringing that to my attention. Okay, so this monitor and control happens while the build is happening. Again, if it's just you building, then you really don't have to stay on top of anybody but yourself. If you have a team that you are managing to get the work done, then you're going to have more complexity because you have to manage not only you, but you have to manage the people doing the work. So this is what this is about. So monitor and control, this is basically the in-process phase while you're building, is just to review the project progress. Okay, this is where you want to make sure that everything's moving along swimmingly, and that if needed, take any corrective actions because somebody was delayed on getting you some content or a logo or answering some questions. If people delay and are late on their tasks, that could make the overall timeline slip. So you need to be very clear. This is what a lot of people didn't like about project management, is if somebody else doesn't deliver, they have an impact on the project. And the project can be late. And people don't like to be told that you're not going to meet your timeline. Well, that's part of being a project manager. So if your client's late getting you content, it's your job to come back and say, okay, thank you, but do you realize this our deadline has now been pushed out 2 days because you were 2 days late getting the information to me. Now, obviously, you don't have to say it that way, but the point is you've got to hold everybody responsible and accountable when it comes to working on a project because there is a deadline date, and if things are late, that date has a jeopardy. And it's not your responsibility to try to make up for lost time. So if somebody sends you something 2 days late, it's not up to you to try to make up those 2 days. That's not your responsibility. If somebody else is late, the client, for instance, or the client's team, then it needs to be brought to their attention. Now, if it's your team that you're managing, then there's some corrective action that has to be done there. And that's on you to try to figure out what you can do to meet that date or let the client know why something has been slipping. Okay. Part of project management is monitoring what's called the project triangle, which I'll show you here in just a minute. But it's basically monitoring all the moving pieces that happen when you're trying to manage a project. And not only the tasks, but also the people that are involved. So the biggest thing of this is just to keep your eye on everything to make sure it's moving along as it's supposed to. And if not, take any corrective action. So you want to make sure you get updates to your deadlines, to your time, to your tasks. Your resources are making sure they're staying on top of everything. If there's any changes in cost or any changes in scope, all of this stuff needs to be kept on top of. And this is where scope creep comes in. A lot of times is because clients try to add things during the building phase. And this is where you can say, look, let's look at the contract. Let's look at that planning that we did. That wasn't part of what we agreed upon. Not that you can't have that, but if you want it, it's going to increase the cost and it's going to increase the timeline. Okay? So remember, that's protection for you. So make sure you stay on top of clients if they owe you anything. Same thing, make sure you stay on top of your team. If you're managing a team, make sure you stay on top of them. Remind them of the deadlines, and if the deadline slips, let them know what happens. And if you change the deadline and the deadline's in your contract that says you're going to deliver by X date, make sure that you get an update to that, okay? Because you don't want the client holding your feet to that date if you can't meet it for whatever reason. So ask them to send you an email or have an addendum created and added to your contract. Have them sign it so everybody's on the same page, again, for that protection piece. Now, change management is part of projects. It's part of life. But any changes to scope, timeline, or cost need to be in writing. And what I would do is if a client told me over the phone, I would say, send me an email. Or I would send them an email saying, this is what I heard. Please respond with, I approve. And then that would go with the contract. Okay, again, project manager by trade. I worked in a corporate arena. Everything was in writing. I don't do anything. So if I had a hallway conversation with somebody about my project and they asked me to do something, I wouldn't do it until they sent me an email. Everything in writing. So I keep that same strict rules, if you will, in my own business because it does protect everybody. And so make sure you have any addendums or contracts or anything you need. Just make sure you get it in writing. CYA, cover your assets, right? Make sure that everything is covered. Right? It's good for you, good for clients. Okay, here's the project management triangle I told you about. This is basically what a project manager's job is they have to manage all the pieces of this triangle. And that's why I say it's moving. The scope, the cost, the time, and the quality. So there's actually 4 pieces to this. So if the scope changes, it usually changes the time, which if the time changes, usually changes the cost, which comes back to scope. And then if you're like, okay, well, if you remove scope, then a lot of times that's going to affect the quality. So you have to look at everything that you're doing on a project from this perspective. How is it going to affect the time, the cost, the scope, and the quality of what you're doing. Okay, so that's, if you like that kind of stuff, that's what a project manager does all the time. Okay, so that's the whole monitor and control piece. Any questions on that before I move on to closing? Okay, great. So this is when you're done. You've implemented what you promised and you delivered it, and the client says, this is great. So you complete the setup. You make sure everything is tested. You have to test everything. You should even have a test plan when it comes to testing in here. And this is, again, from my software development background. You test everything. You want to make sure that when you click on the buttons, it's the right product. You want to make sure that the shopping cart looks the way it's supposed to. If you purchase something, that it actually works the way it's supposed to, so on and so forth. If you provide training to your client of how to add a product or send out a broadcast, make sure that training is done, whether it's a webinar, whether it's a checklist, whether it's a document, whatever it might be. Make sure if you have a remaining balance, make sure that's invoiced. If they're happy, this is the perfect time to ask for a testimonial, right? Say, woohoo, I love this. Ask, okay? Remember, the answer is always no anyways until you ask, so ask for a testimonial. You can also create a project template. So if this is something you're going to be doing over and over again in your business, a lot of the task management systems have project templates where you could just create a list of the same task over and over again, and every time you create a new project, you'd apply the template. So it saves time, and it also saves any issues of anything being left out. And then don't delete the project in your task management system. You close it and archive it. And that way, if the client comes back to you in 6 months and ask a question, you have the ability to just pop right back in there and find the information versus going, oh, I don't have that anymore, right? Again, I'm from the corporate mentality. I don't delete anything. So make sure everything is tested. And I'll give you a sample test plan as part of the course when we get to that, because we're going to be doing a mock project in this course. Remind them of what they do if they have any additional questions or issues. Get a testimonial. And also, if you're going to be taking over the month to month, let them know what they need to do for that. So a lot of times I would implement one shopping cart and then they would become a recurring client. I would send out their e-zines and I would do their updates and stuff. So if that's how it's going to work, then make sure they understand that. If not, if you're going to hand them off to somebody else, let them know what that process looks like. So this is kind of your timeline, your phases, if you will. You go from initiation to planning, to execute building, monitor and controlling and closing. I still have those memorized from my test. But you follow those phases and they kind of just work themselves. And sometimes they overlap a little, which is fine. Make sure communication is open. And if something's missing, if there's an issue, a lot of people don't like to have to deal with issues. I was never very fond of having to deal with issues, but I know if I don't address them immediately, they will only get worse. So address any issues that you may have. You can create and share a project plan document with anybody on the team. If it's only you and the client, don't need a project plan. If it's you, your client has a team, and you have a team, then the project plan really helps you determine what roles and responsibilities are, because it's really important for people to understand who they go to if they have a question on graphics or content, or and that's what that project plan document can help. And we will be going through these whole phases together here. So we've kind of already talked through the discovery phases. Next thing we're going to actually start doing is diving in and doing, we're actually going to learn everything there has to learn in one shopping cart. And then we're going to actually do a mock project together, which will be these different phases that we're going through. Okay, so any questions on the different project phases before I talk real quick about project setup? And this is something I've already kind of touched on in the first class, but I wanted to hit on it again because to me it's really important. All right. So I've already talked a ton about task management systems, and like I said, I cannot stress enough how important they are. Find one that you like and use it. Okay, I use Teamwork. You can also go into the Facebook group and ask for suggestions from others if you want to find one. But here's the thing: is you have to find one that works for you. Just because Teamwork works for me doesn't mean it works for Cindy, right? You need to find one that makes sense to you, because you'll use it more than if you have one that you fight with. If you're fighting with it, it's not the right one. Find another. They all have a free version. And what I mean by free version is they're all a little different, but you can use it for free, okay? You can just Google task management and try. I had to try several before I landed on Teamwork. I actually left Teamwork and came back but find one that works for you, and then sign up for that free version. And the nice thing about a lot of them is that as your business grows, you can grow as well with the program. So how do you set them up? And I actually have a free training on Teamwork if you want it on my website, if you're interested in how it works. But basically, every client is their own project, right? So Cindy's my client. She would have her own project in there, and then she would just have access to this. Everything is permission-based. You only let them have access to what you want them to have access to. Okay, you can allow them to do things like adding or updating files. So instead of emailing you the content for broadcast, then you spend time digging through your email, have them just put it right in their project in Teamwork. Just add the file, right? Just like adding it to Dropbox, or they could add it to Dropbox, and you could attach Dropbox to that client's file, or excuse me, client's project, and the information will show up there. Show them how to view the progress. So if they want to know what you're doing, right? Because maybe they don't know how to get in and move around in one shopping cart, so they can't see what you're doing. So in order to show them that you're actually working, you can update your progress in your task management system. You don't need to track your time, but you could do % complete, or you could just do it when it's complete, and that way they can see. And if they have questions, they can also just email their questions directly to the project instead of emailing it to you directly. The benefit to that is it stays with the project and it's always there, right? Instead of, again, digging through your email. And then you can even train them on what you want them to know. I always train my clients on what they were going to do in Teamwork, so they knew how to get around. They weren't intimidated, because you may have clients that are tech phobes and don't really want to embrace technology. So show them exactly what you need them to do. Give them a little checklist. I'm a big checklist person, right? And they can say, okay, click here, click here, click here to get this. Click here, click here, click here to do this, and so on. So with Teamwork, which is what I use, you have the ability to create what's called a task template, which I love. You can do it for product launches and basically any type of a launch, any type of a project. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to put in the task, any assignments, any dependencies. So basically have a template of the task you need to implement one shopping cart. You could create one big one, and then you could just basically take out the pieces that you don't need. What this allows you to do is not recreate the wheel every time. In other words, every time you start a new project, you'd have to put in all the tasks involved with, what you need to do in one shopping cart. If you create a template, all you have to do is put the template on the project and then remove the pieces that you don't want. Add any deadline dates, give the client access, and you're ready to go. It's going to save you time, and then the template's easily updated. So this just keeps you from recreating the wheel every time. I know Teamwork does this. I know there's a couple of other products on the market that do this, but one of the things I really like is the ability to make what are called task templates. So again, you can include your task, any milestones, any dependencies, also something called a project notebook. And in Teamwork, it's just a notebook, and it's basically just a file. I would have them put all their login details in there, or anything that's protected information, maybe credit card information, that kind of stuff you don't want to be emailing back and forth. So we would put it in the notebook, which is secure and password protected. And that way they could easily update it, I could easily access it, or anybody on my team could easily access it whenever it was needed. Okay, so here's just a sample just to kind of give you an idea. You want to do your discovery meeting, right? So you want to make sure that this is going to be someone you want to work with. Actually, that shouldn't say discovery. That should say, oh, yeah, that's right. I need to redo these. Send your planning checklist or questionnaire. Have your planning meeting or your kickoff meeting. Set up your project, right? And then have your task list. So you'd have a setup, products, autoresponders, training, and so on and so forth. So this is just kind of high level. But this you could rinse and repeat every time and just remove the pieces or add as needed to each one. Okay, so must have a task management system. So find one and start using it. Add your task and deadlines, because this is going to help clients see that you're actually doing the work, especially if they're a client that hasn't worked with you before. Because remember, it's not like building a website where they could just pop over and see the website. They may not know enough about one shopping cart to figure out what you're doing. So give them the peace of mind by allowing them to see what you're doing by having that task management system and giving them access to it. Add your task and deadlines, update them as they go along, show clients how to go in and actually make any changes, add any tasks, and review any type of progress reports that they need. And remember, ASAP is not a deadline. So if a client says, I need this ASAP, You need a hard, fast date. You can't manage to ASAP because ASAP to me may be tomorrow and to somebody else it may be next week. So you need that hard, fast deadline in order to make sure that you're doing what you need. Okay? Okay, so I kind of just took you through the different sessions. I gave you some tips on setting it up as a project in your task management system. This section is going to go a little bit deeper dive, if you will, into that planning session. Okay, and we'll do a kind of a mock planning session when we start doing the mock project later on so you can see how this works. Okay, you want to review your questionnaire, which, like I said, I've given you one that has pretty much everything you can think of under the sun. You'll want to edit that and make it your own before you send it to clients. It's at least 60 minutes. And this is part of the project. This is not an additional cost the client has to bear. This is part of the project. So this should be included in your price already. Answer questions. And remember, this is what you use to set up their one shopping cart. So it needs to be very detailed, and you need to make sure that you get the answers that you need. And if not, follow up with them to make sure that you did. So the planning questionnaire is a list of questions of the information you need, and what I would call is a list of requirements. If you want to talk project management, we call this requirements gathering. Okay. Everyone's going to be different because every project is different, but you can start with a template and then, kind of tweak it to meet your needs. So here's some sample questions. Okay. Have you purchased one shopping cart? No, but I know I need it, right? What do you use to process payments? PayPal. And I'm just giving you answers here. PayPal works in one shopping cart. That's what I use. Do you have the list of products along with their prices? So if they're going to add products, do you have a list of the prices? Do you know what the prices are? Do you have the content created for the autoresponders? And I have ARs here, but autoresponders. Do you have your branding colors, right? Blue is not blue. You need that hex number. You need the RGB number because there's millions of shades of blue. So that just kind of gives you an idea. When you conduct the call, just like I did the discovery call, I would use a conference bridge. I use Free Conference Call HD. You could use Google Hangouts. You could use Skype. I send them the meeting request, which includes the conference call details, and I do tell them I am going to record it. And then I just go question one by one. Remember, I sent it to them. They may have filled out some of it, but I still want to review it with them to make sure that I understand, they understand, and that we're all on the same page. You could add notes. You could even use Evernote if you wanted to for meeting minutes. I used to use that quite a bit to give access to clients so they could see it. But explain everything and be helpful because remember, you're the expert. So if they ask every question under the sun, that's okay because they don't understand. A lot of clients don't get technology. A lot of times they buy technology because someone told them they needed it, like their business coach, or they went to an event. So they don't really grasp what it is that they've just purchased, even though it's a big chunk of change. You are the expert, so spend the time to really go over it with them. You only conduct the planning session / kickoff call after the contract is signed and invoice paid. You record it. As I said, remember, you're the expert. You can upload the completed questionnaire into your task management system so everybody has access to it. So if there's any questions on a specific thing, sometimes there may be a disagreement on something. If you have the questionnaire, make sure your clients have access to it. And I have used on more than one occasion when there was a disagreement or a misunderstanding, the recording. So we were both on the same page because maybe they said X, but they meant Y. And if they went with Y, that would actually increase the cost. So by having recordings and by having this questionnaire, you have something to go back to and say, okay, here's what we agreed upon. Okay, so out of this whole thing that we just went through, you're going to get your action plan on how you're going to implement one shopping cart for your client or what pieces you're going to implement. Okay, so it's a result of both of the meetings, the discovery and the kickoff, and it helps create the overall timeline for the project. Now, your client may have a deadline date that they want it done, but you need to get an idea of kind of the overall timeline as well. And by setting that timeline, because you're really going to have to know how long it takes you to get this work done. And since you're new to one shopping cart, what I highly, highly recommend is we go through the homework that we do throughout the session, throughout the modules, is time yourself. Get your task management system and time yourself so you can see how long it takes you, because you need to know how long it takes you in order to do estimates. If you're not doing the work, then you need to know how long it takes the other person to do the work, okay? Because that's really how you're going to understand the timeline. Be sure to get your logins if you need your one shopping cart, you need a merchant account, PayPal, website, whatever logins that you need, make sure you have those available. A client can actually create a login for you for one shopping cart versus giving you their own, which I highly recommend. Same thing with the merchant account, their payment gateway. If they have like authorize.net or whatever it might be, you'll need to be able to log in there because you're going to need to set that piece up. And then, you can go ahead and get started. Okay. So hopefully this was helpful to you, kind of give you an idea of what's really involved in implementing One Shopping Cart from what I call soup to nuts. Okay. So before I hit on our homework, do you have any questions? And I would love to know if you found this helpful, if this is something that you found of value, and whether or not you think I should leave it in or take it out. Like I said, I'm always looking for feedback, so feel free to let me know. Excuse me. Allergy season here in the desert. Carla, you would leave it in? Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. You found it helped answer a lot of, great. Thank you. I appreciate you letting me know. This is the kind of stuff I need to know for myself. Cindy, I did find it of value. Is there a difference between project and monthly implementation? Monthly wouldn't be an implementation. Okay. To me, Cindy, monthly would be just operations. You're doing the same thing every month. You're adding products every month. You're sending out e-zines and broadcasts every month. I used to do just that for clients. So that would be not an implementation. That would be more operations. Mary, you think it's valuable. Thank you. Then I'll leave it in. And for those of you listening to the recording, I'd love to hear your 2 cents worth. If you want to send me an email at help@techiementor.com or post in the Facebook group, that would be great. Cindy, but wouldn't it require a planning meeting? My clients who send out their e-zine every month, no, because it was the same template every month. So originally I had a meeting with them when I started, but I didn't have it overall. And maybe I'm missing your question, but you would have to have at least one meeting when you got started to kind of understand how they work and all the different pieces, but then you would do the same thing every month. Does that make sense? Okay, all good information, Phoebe. Leave it. Okay, good. Thank you. I really appreciate your feedback. Like I said, sometimes I think things and then I'm not always right. So Cindy, if it's a new client and you're going to be doing things for the monthly, yeah, you'll have to meet with them to find out what it is they need to do. But then after that, I think you get kind of an idea of what they need. So you could just move forward. Yeah, you have to get the upfront information for the e-zine, right? What template are they using? How often does it go out? So you could have a simple questionnaire just around that. You bet. Okay, thank you. I appreciate everybody's feedback. Yes, thank you, Molly. So here's what I'd like you to do is create a draft prospect form or questionnaire. And I'll actually put a sample in the library if there's not one there. So let me write myself a note to make sure it's there. But this is just for you, for people who come to your website and want to know more about your One Shopping Cart implementation packages. Okay, what would you ask them? Set up a mock One Shopping Cart setup in your task management system. So this means you need to find a task management system and kind of just set up a mock one. And then review my sample questionnaire. And I will be adding to that. So you can download it now, but realize it'll be updated before the end of the course because they've added some new features in One Shopping Cart. Okay, so that's just some simple homework for you. So we reviewed module 1. We went through project management 101. So we went through the phases, initiate, plan, execute, monitor, and control and close. Those are kind of the phases that you go through. And then within all of that, you have an action plan that you're going to put into place to actually deliver what it is that you just sold. And then we talked about your homework. So what other questions can I answer for you? Comments are always welcome as well. Excuse me. Remember, help@techiementor.com if you have any input on this module. As for now, I think I'm just going to go ahead and leave it in because everybody seems to find it of value. But any other questions you may have, you can reach out to us or you can post in that private Facebook group. And remember that Facebook group is only for students, so nobody else is really going to see, nobody does see what else goes on in there. So next week, we are going to actually start working in One Shopping Cart. So fasten your seatbelts because the rest of this, at least for the next several weeks, is going to be all in One Shopping Cart. And then we're going to do that mock project together based on the knowledge that you've gathered over this time. And then we'll take it from there. Thank you, Molly. Yeah, the recording will be out within 24 hours. and we'll send you an email when it's ready. All right. Well, I thank you guys for your time today. And as always, if I can be of any help, you know where to find me. And I look forward to seeing you all next week when we actually get to dive in and start working in One Shopping Cart. Have a wonderful week. See you then. Bye.